we have a special guest originally from Oregon, where he so graciously brought us his weather. He was a junior amateur champion growing up, played Division I college golf at San Jose State University, and always had a passion for putting. After helping a friend on the practice green one day, he was inspired to start an Instagram account dedicated to putting, and that was in 2017. He may not have known it at the time, but this was the beginning of him becoming a well-known putting guru. The Instagram posts on putters putting gained more and more traction by the day, and Mr. Potter has since conducted nearly 4,000 online lessons focusing on the entire process of putting, including mindset, green reading, routine, and stroke. He's spent a great deal of time analyzing the greats. If you scroll through his Instagram, it's a great database, especially of vintage Tiger. It's a lot of fun. Extremely distracting, by the way. I got a lot less done when I was trying to do research on you. Hard to not stop and watch that every chance you get. He now makes a pretty regular presence on the PGA Tour. He's in his 4th year out there, and Jamie says he sees him out there all the time and just soaking it up and spending time with the players he coaches, Andrew Landry, Lee Hodges, and Matt Nesmith, and really just analyzing the greats and continuing to do that and build his knowledge. It's incredible to see the presence he's built on social media and the very unique path he's taken to get to be where he is. I think he's the first person that's spoken at an event like this to come about it through more of an online coaching initially to now coaching in person and at the highest level. We're excited to learn more about your personalized, simple approach. Thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Mr. Marcus Potter.
Thank you guys for having me out here. Appreciate Jamie for inviting me to come do this. But it's kind of an interesting path I took. Like Shar just mentioned, started an Instagram about 4 years ago in March. And just after helping my buddy at a Golden State Tour event, kind of switched up his setup. He was 4'11" when he started at high school, so he was kind of really like this. And then I feel like he did what a lot of people did when they turn professional, even if they're good putters. He went to kind of the textbook conventional where everything has to go up the forearms, but that was anti-him. And that's kind of honestly where I feel like a lot of my philosophies come from is it's taken a lot from the individual and you work with what they have. Because if you look at all the greatest putters in golf, they kind of all have done something a little different. Kind of like Brett talked about, the full swing and putting are two totally different parts of the game. And I think that's something that people are really starting to look at more so now, where it's kind of an entirely different game here than obviously when you're getting the ball airborne out there. And I think that's where people are starting to kind of focus in on. And so a little bit about me, just to kind of go back, like she said, I played college golf, started the Instagram, and then for a few years I was just posting on Instagram, doing online lessons. Started at $15 a lesson, and then eventually started getting more and more people reaching out to where tour players started reaching out, and that's kind of how I ended up on tour. And a little bit just about the philosophy, kind of going with that to start. I look at putting very, very simplistic to where honestly all you're trying to do is find the line, find the speed, and that's it. And you really don't need to do more than that. And I think there's some simple ways you can go about it. For me, the very first thing that I looked at with everyone, going back to the individual, is their setup. I think the first thing that anyone looks at when you're looking at someone's putting stroke, putting anything, is kind of how they hit balls is a little bit of how they're going to set up to it in a normal stroke. And kind of going back to where everyone's a little different, doesn't matter necessarily if the weight's back, forward, if the ball is back a little bit. Obviously, I'll kind of get into more specifics, but everyone's going to have their own setup. And I think that's the one thing I'm looking for with people is finding individuality within your own putting. People ask me who are my favorite putting strokes. Keegan Bradley, Soren Kelton are some of the first ones that come to mind. Keegan Bradley with the belly putter. And the reason those two come to mind is because they've done something to where it necessarily wouldn't be accepted. Keegan Bradley was really low, took it way inside, but he made everything with that belly putter. Obviously, 2011 PGA where he putted great, won his first major. And then the other one being Soren Kelton, who's got split grip, left hand low. It's not something that you would teach someone, but it's actually a quote from Phil Kenyon that I really like. someone talked about what's the commonalities and what's the best putters. And he said, and I kind of really like this, it's going back to not a direct quote from him, but he was pretty much that they figured out their style. They figured out how to start the ball in line with their speed and get the ball in the hole their way. And that's kind of where I think putting is better, to try and individualize it than fit everyone into a mold, because you can make putts doing literally everything. You can chop left on it, you can swing way out and hit them in. And I think that's where people get a little too trying to have it be barely inside, perfectly straight back, perfectly through. And I think that's where things get a little off. So one of the biggest things that I felt like with my putting philosophy that's kind of helped people in general is I just feel like the way I look at path and stroke, everything's going to fluctuate from time to time. No one's going to have a 1.5 degree in path to down the line or whatever their path may be. The big thing I care about for people is the transition of the putting stroke, to where if you take it back and through on the same path, that face is going to square very naturally, whether it be, again, straight up and down, in and out. And I think that's where a lot of just the general consistency comes from for me, is people kind of having a clean transition, and that plays into allowing the stroke to repeat itself more often than not, which kind of goes back to getting into the setup. And kind of jumping around here, sorry about that. But the setup here kind of dictates everything for me. So going into the first part of kind of like just putting philosophy for me would be the setup, would be, and visually is the biggest thing. I was fortunate enough to spend some time with Dr. Craig Farnsworth this year, and I learned a lot about the visual aspect from him, just eyes, because he's an eye doctor, obviously. And his big thing was that everyone's eyes are different. Everyone sees differently. We see shapes differently. We see everything differently. And some things that some of the best putters of all time worked on, Jack Nicklaus included, was just seeing straight. And one of his favorite little things is just to get a string line. I kind of wish I'd brought mine out, obviously. Just get a string line, set up on a string line, and then all you work on is just getting set up to where you can see squarely down the line. Going back to, again, right eye, left eye dominant. Left eye dominant people are going to need to be a little more this way to kind of see down the line better, in terms of left ear to left shoulder and then head a little more down. Because anytime the head gets more down, you can obviously see a little more visually. Right eye dominant people, it's going to be a little bit the opposite, where you go right eye, right shoulder, and then head down a little bit. But that's something that everyone's going to be in a different spot to see from. So one of my main questions to him about eye position was, let's say someone's right eye dominant, like me, for example, and let's just say to see perfectly down this line, my head needed to be like this at first. My question was, through working on the right things, like setting up a string line and just working on, and a couple other drills he gave, I'll talk about, I was like, if someone worked on the proper things with their eyes, would they be able to kind of get into a more neutral, normal setup position? And he said, absolutely. So to me, it kind of goes back to where everything's a little different, but just training yourself on the eye position aspect, kind of being the first part of the setup, there's no right or wrong. Even sometimes people's eyes might actually be past the golf ball, which is something that's kind of been a big no-no forever, is going past the golf ball with your eyes. But that might be for a little bit where some people are going to kind of need to see from. And then as they work on their eyes, it'll kind of naturally straighten up a little bit. Because that's kind of, I think, where a lot of people visually get off, is they've been told forever their eyes need to be directly on top of it. Everything needs to be right there, but that's not where everyone's going to see best from. And so that's kind of the first thing here, is you got to know where you can see straight from. And I think just something as simple as a string line and just working on setting up and being like, okay, where does my setup need to be to get this correct? And then I think from there, that's where you kind of build your stance a little bit. Again, going back to the setup for people, after you get that eye right, everyone's stance, everyone's weight, it's going to be a little dictated by their body, by their swing, just their mannerisms. Because I think putting, like anything, should follow your golf swing, should follow your personality a little bit. Someone like Brandt Snedeker, who talks very fast, moves very fast, has a very fast putting stroke. Ben Crenshaw, on the other hand, someone who's a little more slow, a little more smooth, has that long, fluid putting stroke. And I think that kind of plays into golf a little bit for putting versus ball striking. I definitely think it's a big factor for putting. And then kind of going into the next thing, so if setup's all good, if you have a good eye line, all good there. Speed kind of obviously being the big factor of putting. Speed, I would say, is the most important aspect of putting, and something that if you go to any tour event, you'll see guys pretty much working on all the time, start line and speed being the two main things. And something that I've felt, and that this year I bought a Quintic, and I've been able to kind of confirm it with tour players, confirm it with some other players on the Quintic, is something as simple as grip pressure plays a huge aspect in kind of tempo and obviously speed control. Because you'll see this all the time in typically very bad putters when they'll be short, a lot of acceleration, but what do you see in their hands is kind of where I can see it, is if you see someone that has a lot of acceleration, there's no way they don't tighten up with their hands coming through. And that's kind of something that I actually more so saw online, because I was seeing people just have a ton of acceleration. And so the easiest way, and I've proven this on Quintic with people, where if someone can just focus on maintaining consistent grip pressure, whatever that grip pressure is, it's gonna kind of allow the stroke, no matter if it's a 5-footer or a 100-footer, for that tempo to be very constant throughout the bat or throughout each putt, which kind of lets that ball come off at the same speed each time. And so that's a thought that I work on with my tour players all the time, where it's just something as simple as keeping the same grip pressure throughout. And I think that makes all the difference for people versus someone that kind of goes a little short and they get a lot of acceleration. You're gonna see a lot of that coming through. And it's very rare on the opposite side where you'll see people kind of decrease with the grip pressure, because obviously golf, you're pretty much always kind of hitting it. But my example to people is if you're just gonna kind of move your arm back and forth and you're gonna keep the tension level in your arm the same, versus like if you're gonna speed up, your tension level in your arm is gonna have to go up a little bit. And that's kind of how I feel like people can control their putting stroke a little better, is just through the thought of maintaining consistent grip pressure through the stroke. Doesn't matter if it's a 7 out of 10, doesn't matter if it's a 2 out of 10, doesn't matter if it's a 5 out of 10. All you gotta do is just kind of set up. So me, I feel more of a 3 or 4 out of 10, and I just kind of feel that through the stroke, and that allows everything to just kind of come off more constant, a little easier. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I've found with people, especially amateurs, really kind of just average golfers more than anything, is that when you get the setup in a good spot and then kind of get that tempo right, stuff doesn't really go sideways. Because another example I've used with people is if you kind of hit this putt with the shortest backswing you can and try to accelerate and hit it, you might be pretty good there, but I feel like your speed's always gonna be better when you kind of decelerate into it almost in a sense. And it's obviously an extreme to where if you took a full swing and decelerated, your ball would start on line a little better versus if you go here and tried to rip it, the ball's gonna go all over the place. And that's kind of something that I've verified with Quintic, that as the tempo's gotten better, as the tempo's gotten more consistent, start lines have become really good. And so kind of going back to that grip pressure aspect, and that'd be one thing that I think is really helpful for a lot of people. But I would say it's in terms of probably the biggest aspect of putting, I would say goes back to kind of mindset and practice. Because again, you can make putts a million different ways. Your stroke doesn't have to be any certain thing. And I feel like I've learned this more so on tour, kind of the last 4 years specifically. So I've seen Tiger at maybe 10 events in the time that I've been on tour. And every single event that I've seen him at, he's done the exact same thing. He's got his set of drills. He starts with his tee drill, his little gate drill, starts with one hand, starts with two hands. Sometimes it's on a chalk line. But he goes through his little drills, maybe spends a little more than an hour each time, and then he's done. And you'll see other guys fluctuating a lot, trying different drills, spending just a ton of time on the green, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I feel like you can almost work yourself into putting bad, and that's where the structure and the mindset and practice becomes so big. So this is something I feel like I've learned a lot from Tiger, is his practice structure, where he does the same things over and over. and he cares about his practice. You can see it, and specifically bad players, bad amateurs, they'll set up, they'll just kind of throw some balls down, they'll just kind of whack up, hit them all. They don't really care, they're not really paying attention, and then they go out on the golf course, and then the first hole, they actually have a 10-footer for birdie or whatever, a putt that matters, and they go through an entirely different routine, and so their brain's like, oh, this putt matters, but on the practice screen, I was able to make them because I just didn't care. And I think that goes back to carrying over a little bit of the practice from the practice screen to your golf course, just in terms of the structure of it. Denny McCarthy led strokes gained putting for 2 years in a row on the PGA Tour. I think he's one of the only people to do that. Almost did it 3 times, actually. But I've not seen anyone on the PGA Tour, anyone really ever, take as much time to hit a single putt on the practice screen as he does. And statistically, he's arguably one of the best putters in the history of the PGA Tour. But to me, it goes back to that he doesn't do anything different right here than if he had a 10-foot birdie putt on the first hole. And I think that becomes really big. So where if your practice structure, I'm not asking people to go through a full routine, but like Tiger, every putt he hit on one of these little gates, he cares about. He's actually focused on, versus other guys, you kind of see, this will happen with tour players too, where they're not really focused, they're kind of talking, they're kind of just going through the motions, and then they get on the course, they kind of focus up a little bit, and then they don't make anything, and they're kind of wondering why. Versus the guys like Denny, who's a very consistent putter, and there's not someone who spends more time prepping a putt on the practice screen than that guy. And I think that plays huge into a little bit of everything, because I think that's almost tricking your brain, kind of getting your brain to think like, okay, this is no different than when I hit that 10-footer out there, because I've gone through the same motions. Now, obviously, this matters a little more. I'm not going to say it doesn't matter more, but you're going through the same things. Your brain's kind of experiencing the same thing. And I feel like that's been big to a couple of the guys that I've worked with, where they're like, the consistency of working on the same thing, the consistency of doing the same drills has kind of allowed me to feel more comfortable. And then, like I said, going back, kind of skipping around here a little bit, but I care so much about people walking to it on the putting green, because one of the most common things is like people tell you to make 100 3-footers, 100 5-footers in a row, and I can't tell you how many people you've probably heard say that's bad. I will only say that's bad if you're kind of just going up, hitting putts, not really caring. But if you're hitting putts where you kind of take a little bit of time to walk into each one, you're training your setup, you're training yourself to get into the same spot. Because going back to Tiger again, and I've asked other tour players this, I'm like, what do you think makes Tiger so good? And they're like, when you look at him, everything looks the same each time. Whether it be he's walking into a 6-iron, the ball's in the same exact spot that it was the week before, or it's putter, everything's the exact same. And I've always felt, especially with putting in general, all golf, if you could get into the exact same setup every time, you would have an advantage. Everything would be a little simpler to kind of create that same move. And that's kind of where I'm going with that. But that's where I think practice gets off for a lot of people, is the care which you take on a putting green. I'm not saying that you need to spend all the time doing a full routine, but I just want the attention to be there, because I think that's where a lot of people get off, is the big kind of just lack of awareness of what's going on, of what you're doing. And then when you go out on the golf course, because putting's the one thing where it's determined by a make or a miss. You could lip out a 50-footer, you hit a great putt, you still missed it. You could hit a 320-yard drive, 40 yards left, but if you have a good lie, it's still fine. And so that's why I think putting can be a little crazy in terms of you have to be an eternal optimist, too. I kind of feel like you can't get down on yourself. The best putters, truly, all the time are pretty optimistic, no matter how bad they've been putting. Everything kind of stays together. They don't really kind of jump around. I know that kind of just like I'm sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit. Specifically with good ball strikers, because I work with a couple good iron players, and I asked them, if you hit 5 bad iron shots on the first 5 holes, would you guys consider your iron play for the day done? And they answered no. But you asked them that same question, people that are kind of average to sketchy putters, and they're like, oh, if you miss the first 5 putts, you're like, I'm not going to necessarily have a good day. And I think that kind of goes back to the mindset of it, where it's like you have to be an eternal optimist. Because if you missed your first 10 putts but made your last 8, I'd still say you had a pretty good day on the putting green. And I don't think stats would prove that for people. And I think just the mindset of people, you need to be an optimist. You need to think positively about this, because there's just so much that can go wrong. I feel like one of the best ways to kind of show a student would be to use the putting plate from Derek Ueda or Appel's putting tutor. Go on about a 20-foot putt, 25-foot putt, doesn't matter if the quality of the greens really. You will see putts that go through with very similar speed that do not go in. And I feel like that says a lot about putting to me, in the sense that it's not perfect. These are not perfect surfaces ever. You can have the same 10-footer in the morning and afternoon, and putts based off grass growing, people stepping in your line, things are different. And you can't get too caught up in any one thing. That's what I'm saying. Optimism is probably one of the biggest things for putting. You're always feeling like the next one's going to go in, that you're going to give yourself a next chance.
I just have a quick question about pre-shot routine.
Yeah.
If there's any correlation between good putters and the same amount of time it takes them to get to the ball versus bad putters with a longer or shorter amount of time?
So that kind of goes back to a little bit of practice green, kind of trying to keep that same general timing. But, oh yeah. Sorry, so he asked about good putters versus bad putters and the timing of their tempo or of their routine on the putting green, if it's quicker, slower. And I would say that that definitely does transfer in. You'll kind of see it where guys kind of, whether bad putters after a few holes, they start to get quick, but you'll notice the best, honestly, ball striking and putting, chipping, whatever, their routine stays the same. And that's what I was talking about a little bit, where that's something you're working on the practice screen. Like, I've seen Denny McCarthy time it out. I've seen people time their routines out, and I think that's really good to do. I think that's a good question. And something that I've told players, especially good ball strikers that hit a lot of putting greens, again, talking about tour players here, but this kind of, it goes for everyone, is this is a different area of the golf course, and I almost feel like you need to set your mind up for it. So when I play it all the time, when they're telling my tour players now, but like, you almost need to approach this a little differently, in the sense of, you get on a green, you almost need to walk a little slower, do things just a little slower, bend down a little slower, get up a little slower, and that kind of plays into nothing getting crazy fast, everything just kind of staying more fluid, because that kind of goes back into the routine question, where like, I've seen people think everything could be fine for 5 holes, and then they've missed 5 putts and they start to get quick, and then it just gets, it snowballs from there, where everything gets way worse, versus the guys that kind of stay in their routine, stay in their process, stay in their plan. They kind of can manage those 5 holes where putts didn't go in. They're like, okay, that's fine, and then just kind of move on and keep everything the same. And one thing I forgot to say, if you guys have any questions, just feel free to fire them out, raise your hand, whatever, along the way. But that was a good question, obviously. And then green reading is kind of the next aspect, where this is something I've Oh.
When you're talking about guys getting fast, isn't it always translate into like a faster stroke too? Or have you ever seen somebody go like, they start speeding up and fast, and then their stroke actually gets too slow?
Typically it's too fast, but that can happen. It's just because they get out of their natural rhythm. And then some people, they might be defensive. It could be a super fast putt, and they could be going super fast, and then last second they're like, oh, I need to slow down. Or it could be the opposite, where they're fast the whole time. And that kind of goes back to where it's like, find your pace on the putting green and do everything kind of at that pace, whether it be kind of getting up a little slower or whatever it is. And I think that's what's going to play a big factor in that. Any other questions right now, or? So you're kind of talking about like an abrupt finish versus like a longer follow through?
Yes.
Okay. So that's kind of what I was going to with the grip pressure aspect, where you wouldn't really be able to see anyone do that without kind of a big hit in their stroke. So anytime that happens, there's really typically going to be a big acceleration. anytime they can stop it that quick. But that's where I think specifically for that question, where an abrupt follow through is happening, I think a great drill just to work on that is just some simple one-handed putting. Because you'll notice that every time you take a one-handed stroke, it's always going to be longer. The putter's going to have a little more flow to it. And I think that's going to be a grip pressure thing that you'll be able to notice too. Because this is something, going back to the acceleration, a little bit of that abrupt follow through, where I've given lessons to people and you can kind of almost set people up for failure a little bit with this. If you know someone has a lot of acceleration, let's say, that's one of my favorite drills to kind of just to work on the transition. It's just a really simple pause drill where you just take it back and pause for 4 seconds. But if we're gonna do that pause drill to that far hole, you're gonna need to take a pretty long stroke to not add any acceleration. And so I've seen it with people where I've had good players and I've kind of set them up a little bit and I'm like, okay, do this pause drill, but take a long enough stroke, but don't necessarily tell them to not accelerate. And you'll see people, they'll kind of set up to this, they'll do this pause drill, and they'll hammer it. And that's a great sign. Honestly, I had a dude walk it off. It went 47 feet past the hole onto the next tee box. And it was a head pro of a golf course in Oregon. He was a really good player. But it was just something that made him very aware of what was going on. And I think that's a great drill to do that. Because again, if you're gonna take a long enough stroke to just kind of let the putter fall on the ball, you don't need to add any acceleration. And I think this is a great way to work on this with students, is to just literally take it back and just kind of let it fall on the ball like that. And I think that is a really good drill for it. But that's just kind of something that's a great way to show acceleration, to kind of make it aware for your student. And so I kind of mentioned about a Quintic, which is just a launch monitor for putting. But these golf balls, you kind of get away without really having a Quintic, really have any crazy machine. Students can do this, because I, for 3 years, went without any sort of putting machine, taught tour players with just an iPhone, because you can see really everything you want. You can see a little bit of your path, obviously, just from down the line. Don't necessarily need to know the numbers on that. But the big thing I like with these golf balls, because I feel like this is a great way to just work on people's putting, is if you set these things up, and most people are going to have a dot or a line on their putter. And the big thing I like to do is just get behind it, almost kind of in a sense, hold your phone above it so you can kind of see the path, and just see where that putter comes into the ball. Does it roll good? Was it off the heel? Was it off the toe? And that's a great way to show people what's going on without any sort of fancy machine. That's just an iPhone with a golf ball that you can draw a black line down the middle. You don't even need a fancy ball. Just some really simple stuff. And I think that's a great way to work on contact. Just a great practice tool, but nothing too crazy there. Any other questions or anything right now? Yeah.
As far as technique, I know some players kind of let their arms hang and swing freely, and some like make this kind of tuck like their arm into the torso. What do you like to see as far as technique?
So that kind of goes back to a little bit where like it's going to base off the body type a little bit, how that person swings their golf club. He asked about just kind of my preference on arms, where they're going to be tucked, hanging. Because you got, I mean, like I said, that's what I feel like is the cool thing about putting, is there's no right or wrong to it. And that, I feel like, is one of the main things that I've learned on the PGA Tour in general with golf. Obviously, there's accepted things that work, but everyone out there has gotten good enough at what they do to be on the PGA Tour. And kind of going back to everyone's going to be different here, where it's just, there's people like Kevin Na, who's got his arms out here. Tiger's a little more neutral with everything kind of set in. There's no right or wrong to it. It's just, obviously if something's not working at all, it's obviously worth the change, or it's just total failure there. But I think for the most part, people are gonna be naturally in a decent spot. You might need to change some stuff here or there, but I think that's something you would be able to tell. Like if it just looked really uncomfortable for someone to swing a putter like that, then you're like, okay, that just something's not right there. But I think it goes back into everyone's body's going to be so different that you can't. There's no one way to do it.
As long as they can kind of repeat it.
Exactly, and that truly is the biggest thing that I've learned on the PGA Tour. Like, so I've gotten to know a couple guys. JT Poston, I just talked with him because he's a great putter, and he'll give me little tips on putting, or I'll ask him something, he'll answer. he's got a very unique stroke. His hands are really high, takes it a little inside, and that's not something you would teach. It's not a technically pretty stroke, but he rolls the ball great and he makes a ton of putts. So you'd never change that. And that kind of goes back to, again, if you can start the ball in line consistently like these guys work on, and your speed control's good, there's really not much that needs to be changed. Some stuff can be fine-tuned or tweaked, kept in check with drills or whatever, but I think technique, I didn't really want to talk too crazy much about because I think it can be so much. I think there's so much you can do with it, because there are people, like Brooks has kind of changed it where he lined it up off the toe forever and then looped it over. He's kind of gotten it back to the middle of the putter now, which I don't necessarily know why, but he was one of the people, like, I would never have imagined that someone's going to win 4 majors line the ball up off the toe of their putter like that and rolling it as great as he did. There's no right or wrong. It's like he could start the ball in line, he was launching it good, and he had speed control over it. Yeah.
I teach a number of students that have vision problems, depth perception. Do you have any tips on how to help someone judge distance with, somewhat of a failure of vision?
So that was actually something from Farnsworth a little bit. He talked about depth perception and people that have struggle dealing with it. And so it's kind of something that I feel like it's an awareness thing more than anything. A lot of it was working on it. But a great drill for people, and this is something that I'm sure a lot of you people have seen, where it's like, have a 15-footer or whatever. So you have someone set up to it, and then you just have them close their eyes and kind of walk and put their putter where they think the hole is. And if they can do that pretty consistently, walk with closed eyes, set that putter down, that just means their natural awareness of where things is pretty good. And then a really simple test that I thought was pretty cool was from Farnsworth, is like if you just kind of put your fingers together at the end here, and you kind of looked up to an object. So let's say I just do it to the hole that's 40 feet away. And so you kind of close your eyes, put it up there. And so I was short there, and that's a great test. He goes, if my fingers were way above it, like pointing way past it, or way short, he goes, your perception is telling you that the hole's here, but it's actually here. Or your perception is telling you that the hole's here, when it's actually here. And that's kind of something that a lot of tour players, when they're getting a little off, because he's had a lot of tour players just go to him for just visual reasons. And that just the depth perception was a big aspect. So something as simple as like that little drill, again, just walking, closing your eyes, putting that putter in the hole. And then this is a great test more than anything. Just kind of pick a hole, close your eyes, put it up, and then wherever that is, you kind of naturally learn to see more. But it's more so just an awareness thing. I think putting to towels would be good for that too, setting towels at different distances. And then peripheral vision, I know, is a big factor in putting, and that's where kind of getting the eyes down more. Because if you're up here more, it's easier to see when you're down, and I think that could be a big factor in that too, is getting the head a little more down. They could be blocked out in this kind of in a view in a sense. Any other questions? Yeah.
With respect to green reading, using your feet to feel, and then also proximity close to the hole, reading green visually in the local area, but also using the macro environment.
So I've definitely kind of gotten into Aim Point Express this year, because that's been the one thing I feel like naturally I've always been able to read greens well for whatever reason, but how do you explain that the slope's 2 degrees left to someone that can't visually see it? And that's where Aim Point Express has become really big. I think that's been a factor you're going to start seeing more and more and more out on tour, especially eventually when they get rid of green books. But I definitely suggest that, people kind of learning to feel it in their feet. And then kind of one of the factors of that is, so let's say you have a 10-footer or whatever. The big thing that people are starting to count now, kind of going back to Aim Point Express, would be the first third, kind of 30, 25% of the putt almost doesn't matter as much, obviously, as the end. It still matters. You can't say it doesn't matter. But this part's not going to affect it as much as when the ball's dying at the hole. And let's say it's just a flat 2% across. The 2% there is not going to affect it as much as the 2% here. And so kind of you're reading a little bit more, which is why Aim Point Express would want you to get 2 reads, kind of one here and then one more here, to kind of get where the ball's actually going to be kind of dying, kind of more breaking speed. But that's kind of, I would say, something that would be really good for, I think, anyone, is just, even, I feel like at the bare minimum, if someone could just feel the difference of, okay, that slope's right, that slope's left, you're gonna get a huge benefit of that alone. Yeah.
I'd like to know your personal preference on holding the putter.
Okay.
I'd also like to know, because we're seeing other types of holds these days, more than any time, maybe some pluses and minuses of what you see on tour.
Okay, so asked about kind of how people hold the putter and preferences. So again, I don't really have a preference. Like one of my players just got on the PGA Tour, Lee Hodges. He won a Korn Ferry event last year, and I kind of showed up. He didn't really text me any videos of it, but I show up and he's putting like this. He's got a claw, right foot way back, heel way up, and he made everything that week. But kind of going back to, that was something that he kind of figured out on his own, just to get the putter to swing how we were talking about it. But in terms of how people hold it, left hand low, I feel like it's become a very popular grip, and I feel like that's great, just kind of for getting everything to work a little more down the line. I feel like people can get a little, not so much the tour players, but average amateur gets a little kind of casty with right hand low. And I think that's one of the greatest benefits for left hand low, is it kind of gets everything just kind of holding more down the line. But claw's becoming more, I mean, kind of like you said, there's just been a million different grips that are kind of people are starting to mess around with now. Claw's been really good for people just to kind of help isolate things a little bit. I like this for some people just because it kind of allows the right hand to obviously not be as involved. Some people think that when this gets on there, it can be almost too involved, especially if people are doing that. But I think when you kind of grip it like that, or however people hold it, pencil, doesn't really matter. It just kind of keeps it out. But it goes back to, I think people need to try different grips, try different stuff. And what feels best, what rolls the ball the best, what's most consistent for you is what it's all about. Because one of my players, Andrew Landry, started right hand low, and he had a really bad cast, and we couldn't really get rid of it right hand low. So I typically wouldn't want to suggest changing the grip, but it was kind of his idea. And just by going to left hand low, he switched the grip. So there are times that grips are going to be helpful. Like again, if you have way too active of a right hand, left hand low or claw could be a really good answer. But I just think people should try different grips. There's no reason why people shouldn't try left hand low. There's no reason people shouldn't try anything just to see how it fits, see how it works. But again, I think anything can work for anyone. It's just based off what I've seen out on tour now for so long. Yeah.
If you had somebody like 16 years old who wanted to go on to be a college golfer, and you told them these are the so many drills you need to do every day that you come to practice, what would they be?
So if I were to design a practice plan like that, again, I would kind of go back to copying Tiger a bit, where, I mean, I'll just kind of give it like what I would think a perfect practice plan would be. I would want someone to start on like a 5 to 7 foot straight putt with a gate drill for the putter, and be aware of their setup, be aware of their path, but I'd want them to make 50 to 100 in a row every day to start out. And then kind of, there's so many different drills, but circle the hole drills. So you'd kind of go from that 5-footer, and then you'd stay within 5 feet, and you do a drill that circles a hole at 3 feet, drill that circles a hole at 5 feet, and then a lot of speed work, and then a lot of free putting. But I think putting, it has to be something you enjoy. Obviously, like I enjoyed putting when I was 15, 16. It's something I liked. And so they kind of have to find a way to make it fun. Because I looked at putting as golf's version of shooting the basketball is how I look at it. It's no different. And I think that's fun, getting the ball in the hole that way. So it kind of goes back to that. But it would be something that they would have to want to do. But something as simple as just that right there, like nothing crazy, just straight putts, circle the hole, speed, and then free putting. If you could do an hour at least a day, which I know can be a lot for some people, but if you want to play college golf, I think you could find the time. And that's something I would recommend too. I would much prefer people, talking about someone that would want to play as much golf as possible, to practice as much as they can. Obviously, everyone's situation's different, but talking tour players, aspiring college players or whatever, I would much rather anyone put an hour of putting each day than 4 hours every 3 days, because you're touching that club more consistently, you're getting a better feel for it. And I think at times when people spend too much time on the green just kind of sporadically, and it's unstructured at times, they can kind of go a little crazy and talk themselves into putting bad. I've seen that out on tour with players I've worked with, where I've had their swing coach call me and they're like, you should have seen the putting practice this week. They're hitting 12-footers that break 5 feet and they're getting mad that they weren't making them. And you can talk yourself into putting bad, you can trick yourself into putting bad again, just because it's so easy to miss putts, it's so easy to make putts. But that's where I think having so much close, seeing a lot of putts go in is so big for the mentality of it. And that's what I would want people to take away. A big thing would be, look what a lot of the better putters do. I think it was Graham McDowell said 80% of his putting practice, he wants to have like an 80% success rate because he wants to see the ball go in. And so that would be something that I would highly suggest people preach, would be a lot of stuff where it's like, okay, you see a lot of putts go in, and then stuff where it's not necessarily, might not even be putting to a hole for speed, and then you're just kind of done because you don't overwork yourself just kind of for the average player. But I think people can trick themselves into thinking they're putting bad just by hitting too many putts, hitting the wrong putts, or just kind of being unfocused on the practice green. Yeah.
In terms of focus and intention during practice, what are your thoughts on people practicing with music under different conditions in which they would compete?
So I'm fine with that, but again, people can't just be zoned out to the music. You got to be aware of what you're doing. And I think people taking, like, putt for 20 minutes in a row and take a 5-minute break. Putt for 30 minutes in a row, take a 10-minute break. Like, give yourself a little breather, because I mean, it can be a little tedious, especially when you're hitting the same things over and over. But I think music's great. Like, I mean, I've personally, and I've talked to a bunch of players, my best putting around, some players that I've talked to, they're singing a song in their head that they're listening to, like whatever it is, like Jack Johnson just in your head, and you're just kind of listening to it. And I think that's great for people, because I think you can build a little rhythm, and it can kind of give you almost a little bit of calm, almost in a sense. Because I mean, I know, like, when I was nervous, especially sometimes, I would just in my head be singing a song, and that kind of got me into, like, okay, I'm just on the practice putting green again. So I think that would be good. Oh, yeah.
Can you talk to us a little bit about free putting and or show us some?
What do you mean? What do you mean?
You said free putting.
Oh, so just putting to holes, not like any structured drills or anything. So I would suggest everyone end their putting session doing some free putting. That's what I mean by that. Just hitting putts, getting back into the feel of it. Because if you spend too much time short, you spend too much time just doing speed drills, you don't really have a feel of kind of matching line and speed again. And so I really like my tour players going around for 10 to 15 minutes after we go through all the drills and everything. And anything from 10 feet and over, I typically like saying, because you actually have some speed involved. But you have 3 golf balls, and I like them to try and get better on each putt. Because especially for tour players, it's like you have great greens, you got 3 golf balls, you should be able to get consistently better on each one. And that third one, you should make one of them.
Thank you.
Can you show us some of the drills you use with your tour players?
Yeah, so I kind of talked about them a little bit, but again, the drills that I'll use with my tour players, I feel like one of the main ones, again, is just a simple chalk line on a 5 to 7 foot straight putt, a little uphill. And I'll post about this all the time. I'll typically, like, 50 to 100 in a row is what I like them making. I want them to at least just back out of it a little bit. But typically, the first 10 of that will be the pause drill that I kind of mentioned earlier, where you just take it up, take it back, and then get it to go through. And so that's kind of how I want people to start. And then a speed drill, one of my favorite speed drills for people, I'll kind of set it up here. And this is something you can do with a hole. You can do this kind of with a ghost hole. That's been becoming more popular. So typically kind of like 18 inches, maybe almost 2 feet past, kind of set an alignment stick down. And then something at 5 feet, 15 feet, and 25 feet. And so the goal of this would be, these would be tees instead of golf balls. It's kind of like baseball in a sense. So a good drill, you gotta get it to the hole. So as long as it would fall in, it counts. And it has to stop short of hitting the alignment stick or whatever you have past it. and you got 3 strikes. Anything short or anything long is a strike, and you got to make it through 3 here, 3 here, 3 there, 3 there again, 3 there again, and 3 here. So I'll kind of talk you through it real quick. So let's just say I got all 3 of those, then you'd move back. Let's say I missed 2 there, then I'd keep moving back. I missed 1, then you start over. That's just a simple speed drill that I think is really good, but nothing too crazy there. And then honestly, one of my other favorite drills is a pentagon around the hole at 3 feet. The straight putt being the tip of the pentagon, and you go 25 in a row, switching on every putt, and then back those tees up 2 feet and you go 20 in a row. So it's just, again, seeing a lot of putts go in. And the way I look at that too is, so let's say you made 50 in a row on chalk line, and then you go to that little circle drill, and you make, let's say you missed 2, but so you made pretty much like 68 out of 70 putts-ish. So you just made 120 out of 122 putts or whatever. And that's how I feel like things are kind of getting a little confidence, seeing the ball go in a lot, and that's what I mean by that. But it's really nothing crazy in terms of drills. It's keep the things in check. I don't necessarily think, it's not that my drills are better than anyone else's drills. It's find your set of drills and build a plan and stick with them. And I think that's the big thing that people should get from this is Tiger has his plan. He's literally done it since he was a kid. And it's just finding your own plan, finding your own drills, finding your own feelings, stroke thoughts, and sticking with them and just getting really good at those.
Marcus, will you expound on Danny McCarthy? I've watched his document now for 2 years. You tell everybody here about him and how magic he is and let it fly.
Yeah, so Jamie just asked about Denny McCarthy, who I talked a little bit about earlier. And Denny is a very unique individual. So we've played practice rounds with him. I just love talking to him because he's obviously been a really good putter on the PGA Tour. But like I said, his whole philosophy with putting is honestly very simple. And I think that's one of the things that you'll find from the best putters in the world is that honestly, they look at putting very, very simply. So I think it was Houston last year, we asked Denny, because he'd just come off 2 years of number one. We were asking, like, what do you, when you're looking at green reading books? And his answer was pretty much like, I'm looking to see if it's like severely going left, if it's kind of going left, if it's just barely going left. And then he goes, from there, I just kind of make my own read, but I just kind of wanted to get the general feel. And one thing that really, really surprised me about Denny was how he lines up his golf ball. It's very unique. He kind of only shows like a minimal part of the line. And he even said that he doesn't even necessarily care if that line's exactly where he wants it. And I've kind of heard the same thing from Tiger, that Tiger puts the ball down, has a line on the ball to find the center of the face, not so much for the actual line. And that's kind of what Denny said he does a little bit too. But he's like, I just see a general area over here, and I'm just trying to roll it over that. I've heard the same thing from JT Poston. I've heard the same thing from Kevin Kisner. All these guys are trying to do is just like, okay, they're like, I see my spot. I just want to roll it over that. Some people are more line putters. They see like, okay, I just need to start it on that line. But other people are spot putters. And that's, again, kind of something that you're going to kind of mess around with individually to find out what you like better. Kind of trying to roll it over this patch or trying to just start it on this line. Some people are going to think one's better than the other. But that, I would say, is the biggest thing from the best putters on tour is it might not look it, but they keep it stupid simple. Like, one of my favorite things from Kevin Kisner was I asked him, I was like, what are you thinking? And he goes, I just want to roll it over my spot with my speed, and why would I want to complicate it any more than that? And I was like, well, exactly. And I think that's where putting's gotten a little crazy for people because it's defined by a make or a miss, and there's really no necessarily commonalities between the best putters. And I think that's thrown people off for so long. It's just, if you can get it in the hole consistently, that's really all that matters. And kind of going back to what he said about Denny, Denny's process is so good to me. His drills, everything he does, he just cares about. and then he goes out and he just kind of lets it go on the course. And I feel like that's why he's been a successful putter. But again, I feel like nothing he does any differently on the practice green is what he does on the golf course. And that to me says a lot about why he's been so successful on the greens. Oh, yeah.
Discussed or seen any discussion about where you look at the golf ball, which sometimes I've given someone asked me recently, do you look at the front of the ball, you look at the back of the ball? I just read not too recently from Paul, not Paul McGinley, but he won the Open, Paul Lowry. And he was talking about how he tries to hit the middle of the golf ball. I went out and tried that like the next night or whatever. I'm making everything. It's crazy. Talk about that a little bit in terms of where you set your eyes.
So that was a good question. He asked pretty much about kind of where people set their eyes, where people are kind of looking. And so he's talking about Paul Lowry. He talked about looking at the middle of the ball. That would be my stock answer, would be to look at the middle of the golf ball. But I've talked about this with players I've worked with, because a lot of tour players, like specifically who I'm working with, Andrew Landry, when he's coming through on his full swing, his head's turning a little bit, and he's like, dude, I'm looking here when I'm hitting the golf ball. So he's like, it honestly does feel a little weird for me to look there. So we've talked with him where he's kind of looked more so at the front of the golf ball. And my big thing with that is I would just want someone to look at the exact same spot. So like, I mean, you've seen it forever. Some guys literally will just mark a dot on their golf ball and just like, okay, I just want to see that dot through my stroke. And that dot, again, you could put that dot up front, you could put that dot really anywhere. But I would say I would want people to look at the center of the golf ball, but that's not necessarily where they have to be. Some people are going to be more so the front. Again, people that kind of turn their head a little more early on the golf swing might like that.
I found that who knows how long this lasts for, but I found that when I was doing that, because it's crazy. I mean, I can't even begin to tell you how much I was making after I started fooling around with this little less than a week old, folks. But it simplified everything. It took my mind off of the hole, and it just really put it almost on the stroke, and whatever happened in it, and so I
No, and so I did a Mark Immelman's podcast, and I told him something. He's like, "What would you tell someone?" And I was like, "Just keep your eye down," because for golf swing, that's kind of becoming a thing where people are starting to turn their head, and that's becoming acceptable now, normal. But for most people in putting, Luke Donald's the one main example I can think of where he turns his head, but the shoulders don't open. He just kind of turns the head, and he keeps the eyes in the right spot. But he's the one person I can think of that actually kind of opens up early that you would never want to change that, obviously. But for most people, and going back to that Immelman podcast, I told him, I was like, I'd want people to see a dimple on the golf ball through the stroke. And he went into a little Gary Player story from when he won a British Open. He goes, he went into the church and he just prayed that he could see a golf ball through, see a dimple through his stroke. And I thought that was kind of a cool little story there. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of yours. I watch you on Instagram.
Oh, thank you.
And I've seen a couple of your players have their hands really close together. Landry being one of them, and what's it, Naismith?
Naismith, yeah.
Naismith, yeah. What's the purpose of that?
So that is a kind of a preference for me. I think, and this doesn't have to be for everyone, because if look at Lee Hodges right now, he's got more of a split hands, someone I'm working with. But I believe when the hands are more on top, hands are more together, they're going to work more as one. And I see this more in a lot of just high handicaps I teach online, when they'll send me grips that are really split grip, and it's like the hands they tend to fight each other. Rarely when you kind of do this are the hands going to kind of work in unison. And so that's kind of why I like people to get the hands together, whether it be left hand low, right hand low. I really like them to be as on top as possible, just because I feel like everything kind of hinges better.
I have a second question.
Yeah.
Second question. When it comes to path or like face aim, do you see that genius putters might do different things for right to left putts, left to right putts, and straight putts?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think people. I think I can putt pretty good.
Can you beat the guys that you teach?
If I'm practicing, I put money on myself. Yeah.
Okay,
Question here.
Oh.
Curious your best practices when approaching a putting lesson, whether it's taking on a new student or an existing, and your thoughts of, I heard of a metronome being used for the time putting stroke.
So I'm kind of just learning a little bit about metronomes. I honestly haven't been a huge fan of them, but that's something I feel like just trying to expand how I can help people. But going into a new putting lesson, I always honestly, I don't like saying anything for like the first 5 minutes. I typically like just people just totally observing. Kind of the routine's a big part of it too, how someone gets into the putt. And that would be a big factor, would be kind of just watching kind of the whole process of how they're going about it. Because I feel like that's one of the first things that I'll see with people, something that I kind of talked about. One of the biggest things that I feel like that I hate and you don't really see with good putters, it's very, very rare. And I think Tiger kind of tricks people a little bit because Tiger himself does this, sets his feet, and then he resets his feet. But I think the best putters of all time have set the putter head first and built your stance around that. And that's something that I see in a lot of bad players is they set their feet first. And so let's say you set your feet like this, but the putter's over there. So it's just never going to be comfortable. So I would much prefer everyone, and it doesn't need to be this way, but if you look at the best putters, they pretty much all do this, is to set that putter first and you build your stance around the putter head, and that's going to let everything kind of swing a little more naturally. I mean, especially if you're using a line on a golf ball, all you got to do is just set up to it and then just build your stance to that putter head, and I think that's going to allow you to feel more comfortable over it as well.
Did you run one through in your routine like it was going to be utopia for you?
Yeah. So Jamie just asked me to kind of go through a good routine here. So line, no line, that's totally up to the individual. I personally don't use a line, but kind of, let's say you've got your whole read down. I don't think routines need to be anything long. They don't need to be anything crazy. I would just, some people are going to do practice strokes. I have a personal preference that I would like everyone's last look. This is a kind of a Stockton thing too, to be from directly behind it as opposed to right here. Not that this is really an issue, but I think if your last look is from directly behind it, you get a better tell of the green or just of this actual putt versus if you're off to the side a little bit, kind of coming from here. So just a good routine would be, I would want the last thing that anyone to be really would do would be get behind it. And this kind of goes back into taking a deep breath here is where I think is great for people. Where just a real big breath. And this kind of goes up to where it kind of gets slower again. And then the spacing is kind of something that depends on the individual too. I worked with a guy who was one of the fastest players on tour, and yet with his putter, he was coming in from like back here, and it was almost awkward to watch him get to it because he was a fast player, versus another guy who's kind of slow, probably needs to be closer to it or a little further away. And kind of goes back to everything has to play into yourself. Everything needs to be individualized, but I wouldn't say anything. I just want the last look on your routine to be from here, because I think if your last look's from here, you kind of set up to it, makes everything a little easier. Yeah.
There's been some great players that have aimed right, some that have aimed left. If you had a player that was doing that but getting a good starting line, would you work with that or would you try to get him aimed better?
So just asked about people aiming right or left, kind of, and starting it on, but still able to start it online. And that's something, especially out on the PGA Tour, that I've really tried to be careful of, because there are people that do that, and these guys got to the highest level of the game for a reason. That's something you just need to be really careful of, because actually another putting coach that I've just kind of follow information of, John Graham, he was talking about that exact same thing. And he goes, there's people that have done that and fixed it, and they've gotten worse. And so it's like, you need to be really aware of it and kind of know when is the right time to fix it and when's not the right time to fix it, because kind of like he just said, there have been players that have aimed 1 degree right, but they start it online every time. And so why would you want to change it necessarily? And that's where I think you can almost overdo putting a little bit with technology, because does that person want to know he's aimed 1 degree right because he starts on the line every time? Probably not.
How about an
I think that would be the more time to change it. Because I think just with kids, it's easier to change anything with not necessarily affect it. Yeah.
When you're talking to one of your guys and their speed's off, have you found a tendency that usually it's more like their strokes messed up or their touches just off, or it's more of a green thing, or they're uncomfortable with the speed that week? Have you kind of noticed anything talking about?
So the grip pressure aspect, when like I want to say guys were like, dude, I just stopped thinking about it, and the tempo got way out of whack. But there are times where it's just whether you could prepare perfectly that week and tournament comes up and Thursday comes around and then shit hits the fan and who knows why. But that is a very common thing on tours, speed issues a little bit, because the greens don't fluctuate a ton, but is trying to get that speed dialed in. And again, goes back to tempo more than anything. And I think the grip pressure aspect plays into that. But that's something that you can kind of keep in check with the grip pressure, and then obviously just checking devices occasionally, just kind of make sure it's in a good spot.
Yeah, I have a question. Where do you sit on like focus, like kind of the mental mechanics of putting, like internal focus versus external focus? So for example, being really mechanically minded versus like seeing a picture of the putt and trying to sort of match the picture.
I kind of like, so I don't know if anyone heard that. He asked just kind of about the mental side of things, like being either mechanical thoughts over it or kind of putting to the picture like Tiger's talked about before. And I feel like with everyone in golf, pretty much everyone's played their best golf at times when you're just not thinking about it. And that's kind of why I like people to care on the practice green, so that when you're out on the course, you've kind of already done all your work and you can kind of just let it kind of happen more naturally. Because I don't want people to think like, oh, this needs to come the green a half inside or whatever. Sometimes I don't think a stroke thought is bad necessarily. Like I just need to take it inside because if someone's taking it out or whatever, I don't think that's necessarily bad. But most all of the time, I want people to be as empty-minded as possible and just kind of be as reactive as possible.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
Right over here. Right over here.
Don't know
There we
what.
go.
No.
So you just touched on speed a little bit. We haven't talked a lot about speed. There's a lot of talk about the line. But we all know that speed supersedes.
Yeah.
Tempo was one of the things you brought up for speed. And I've read that approximately 90% of the guys on tour putt at about 76 feet per minute is their stroke time. And we had a gentleman bring up the metronome over here, so that's not something that you would have your people work on or work
So I honestly, like, I haven't spent a ton of time on metronome, so I can't give you a really good answer on that right now. That's something I'm just literally kind of starting to learn more about. But you'll see it because there's different, like I said, acceleration has kind of become the one thing in putting that you don't want. That's kind of become the accepted thing. But there's two guys I can think of off the top of my head, Bo Hostler and Jason Day. Bo's finished 2 years in the top 10 strokes gained putting on the PGA Tour, and Jason Day is obviously one of the world's best putters. Both of them have acceleration in their putting stroke, which is going to throw off their tempo rhythm, throw off their tempo ratio, but you're never going to want to change that. That's been the interesting thing to me. Like, I got Bo on the Quintic, and I knew Bo was a great putter. He was kind of struggling a little bit this year at times, and he just reached out. And I told him from the start, I was like, the one thing the Quintic isn't going to like is your acceleration. It's going to give a red number because you're going to have a lot of acceleration coming through. But I was curious. I was like, why is he a good putter? Because you would never necessarily think acceleration, like I talked about earlier, is kind of harder to manage. But just to kind of go a little off track on that. So he was able to get off with kind of different tempo. Like, it fluctuated a lot. He would accelerate at 4, 5, 6, 7. Like, it fluctuated. But the thing that made him so consistent was he launched the golf ball nearly the same way every time. So of all the people I've put on it, he launches it at 1.5, 1.52, 1.53. And I was like, we probably hit 20 putts and they were all in the 1.5s. And that to me was crazy. But that's where his consistency comes from, is he's able to control the speed. He knows how to control the speed with his acceleration because he launches it so good the ball comes off the same every time.
So an answer for the gentleman over there who talked about the metronome. That does get with your students if you're trying to get them to putt at say 76 feet per minute, which is currently 90% of the guys on tour putt. That beeping sound does get annoying, but Dream On by Aerosmith is at 76 feet per minute, and that's a great one to putt to. So try that one out.
You sing it for us, Angel?
How do you structure your in-person assessment process?
So like I said, so kind of asked about this a little bit earlier. How do I structure like a new lesson? Like I said, the first 5 or 10 minutes are just going to be me kind of observing, watching them hit different putts, seeing what's going on, and then kind of goes back to I'm going to get them on a 5 to 7 foot straight putt. Because I feel like this is where, the reason I want people to start on this, the reason I'm so big on this 5 to 7 foot straight putt is because this is where you can work on the stroke. This is where you can kind of see what's going on. Because if you're hitting breaking putts, you don't necessarily know if you're starting them on the line, you don't know what's right. So I like people to kind of start here, get your base on a straight putt, and then work from there. But kind of going back to how I'd structure that lesson would be watch them for 5 to 10 minutes, and then see what I see, and then get them on this thing. And that's when we start adjusting the setup, talking about feels, talking about different things. Because I feel like the way I would do it is I would get the stroke looking good here, get the setup looking good here first on a 5 to 7 footer, whether it mean you spend 20 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes here, and then you kind of go to kind of get the whole bigger feel of it, kind of get longer putts back in there, kind of experience it on different style putts and everything. But that's where I would start, is always kind of watch them first, and then the first thing would be find a 5 to 7 foot straight putt, and then just kind of work on getting the setup right, getting everything in a good spot, and getting them feeling that stroke normal.
Marcus, will you give somebody a 2 or 3 minute putting lesson?
Yeah.
Come on. It's all included.
Got somebody walking on the green.
Jordan, not you.
Somebody that'll miss those.
All right, let's see it. Just watch you hit a few. Not yet.
Of course, of course.
So I'm just kind of looking at setup right now. Like everything from face on looked pretty good. Again, I like how he's walking into it, setting the putter first. Oh, more. So what would you say is the normal tendency for you with putting?
Tend to pull it a little bit too much.
Okay.
Gotta over rotate the face.
Kind of saw a little bit of that.
Find out with pullers that they're aiming right a lot of times.
It can, yeah. And that's kind of goes back to why you want to get people on the straight putt too, is to see how they aim. That was pretty nice.
Come on, everybody. Only took 3 times.
All right. All right, so come set up to this one real quick. So the main thing I'm seeing, which I think can lead to a little bit of that, you have a lot of little like excess movement, kind of with the upper body. Okay. And so something I just want you to kind of feel exaggerated right now is to kind of tuck your hand here and just feel like the upper body points straight to the ground the whole time. It doesn't open, doesn't close, and it's just the right arm and right hand kind of swinging the putter. So everything stays like perfectly still.
Okay. On the ball?
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely better there. So you feel how much quieter that was?
Yeah. Well, I noticed when I was first doing it,
Yep.
right, I felt my body moving,
And that's kind of why that hand across the stomach adds a little extra awareness, I would say. Because you could even see it with how the putter was swinging. It wasn't really swinging right because your whole body was kind of turning, as opposed to just kind of letting the putter head swing a little better. Yeah. Yeah. So now set this up with both hands on it, and then try and have that same feeling of where it was just the arms kind of moving it with that chest pointing straight to the ground. right. The face of that putter is much more stable, though. You can kind of see that. Can you feel that difference too? Probably feels a little odd.
Yeah, it feels more steady. Just something.
Because the setup looks good. It was just this little excess movement. Yeah, that's way better. So then, kind of with these, again, I don't have my phones over there right now, but all it would do is you just kind of set these up. And I love these just to kind of see how the ball's rolling. And then again, you just put your camera, I would just kind of film it like a little down the line view, and you can get a great sense of path. You can use these kind of, put them this way, and you can see the launch. You can see how quickly that ball starts rolling. You can turn them up different sideways. And that's why I think these are so good, because they're just simple little checks that you don't need any sort of fancy machine for.
Well, how valuable do you think like on the TrackMan 4, the TrackMan Go?
Those have been pretty good. Like, so that's been getting way better. Because I like how you don't put anything on the putter too. Didn't move. You can see that face is it's just not closing as much. Because you can feel that you want that whole upper body to rock, huh? But that would be kind of that, and I feel like that's kind of one of the main things that I'm seeing with people is a lot of upper body, even lower body movement. And that drill, I feel like, is one of the main things that just gets people to feel it out in terms of like, okay, if I need to keep everything still and just let the arm swing, what do I have to do? How does this putter need to swing? And I think that's a great just awareness drill for people. But yeah, absolutely.
Took advantage of that one.
Yeah.
You showed us your pre-shot routine, but could you also give us a routine for reading the greens?
Yeah, so I'm one of the people that I think green reading starts before you get on the green. So like if I was coming up to that hole and like I hit the shot like in this, so I know that I can already see that that thing's going that way. And I think I'm naturally looking for the high sides, the low sides, but I think that starts before you get on the putting green. I really do. And then from there, so I was taught aim point from Tim Tucker, Bryson's old caddy. And so I've always kind of been going to the low side. And I think that's a great way to do it. Stockton talked about it. He goes, you should read greens like you're reading a book. You would never read a book from above. And I kind of agree with that. So I feel like you always want to be looking towards the slope. And that's one other thing I think is helpful. Always want to get behind it, so look both sides. But like I said, I think green reading starts before you get on the green. It could be on a different tee box. If you see the 10th hole is next to the 8th green or 8th tee box or something, you can see this stuff. And I feel like that's something that players just subconsciously take notes of. They're like, okay, that thing's swinging way hard that way. And that's something that you should be really doing at all times throughout the day, but especially as you get up to the green, you always want to see where the high and low sides are. And I would feel like that would be just one of the easiest ways to kind of start the process of looking at the green. Yeah.
When do you evaluate the fit of a putter?
So that's one thing too that I haven't really been able to quantify right or wrong yet is putter. And because like going on the Quinta, you can see like, oh, this guy's got great face angle with it. He launches it great, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to make putts with it. And that's kind of the thing where I haven't necessarily found a time where it's like, oh, we should switch putters. Because I'm definitely more of a person where it's the person, not the putter. But like at the same time, I've seen it with drivers and tour players where like it's not the tour player, it was the driver in that sense. So there's no reason that couldn't be the case with a putter at times too. Because you hear stories like, but like, I mean, who was it? It was Jim Furyk that just bought that putter. He won the tour championship out of a barrel of some golf store. And so that's where I think putting is more so, I think it's more so on the individual. I think a good putter will make putts with anything, but I think there are some stuff that will be more beneficial. Like David Adele from Adele Golf was one of my foundations of my putting just because I've known him since I was a little kid. And his whole fitting process goes back to how people see differently. His whole thing is where you have your line. If you have a line, if you have a dot, if you have rounded bumpers, if you have square bumpers, if you have a mallet, if you have a square head, it's gonna get you to a line differently based off how the individual perceives shape. And that's kind of where putting or putter fitting for me has always been more so about what you can align consistently well than kind of what you like to look at more so. And that's kind of where putting has been more so for me. It's just like, if you can align well with it consistently, I think that's more beneficial than anything with putters.
Do you mess around with smash factor at all?
So that was one thing that through the Quintic, and they can actually verify this, that golf balls and putter types matter for that. Because I can't remember the exact date, but the inventor of the Quintic, Paul Hurrion, can prove this via data that as golf balls started getting firmer, less putts were made. And so that's why now you're starting to see companies come out with a lot more inserts. You're kind of seeing softer golf balls a little bit again. They're getting softer on the outside. But he goes, there was a distinct difference when the golf ball got really firm and people making less putts on the PGA Tour.
Is that because the smash factor was lower?
Yeah. And so that's one thing it's on the Quintic is called impact ratio. And it depends on your putter, your ball, where you're hitting it on the face, because there's no right or wrong to it. Yeah, because some people are just going to be way higher, some people are going to be way lower, depending on where they're hitting it and the ball and everything. Yeah.
You like the ball hitting the back of the cup, just rolling in. I mean, I know you said roughly 18 inches, 2 feet.
So,
But what is your thought process on that?
Speed, I feel like 100% goes back to the individual. I think everyone's going to have their innate speed to them. I feel like it goes a little bit to their personality. I just think guys that hammer putts in a little bit are just kind of more that way versus like a Jordan Spieth who dives putts in. I don't think there's one right or wrong. I just think you need to stay true to whatever your speed is, because I think some people's strokes just get the ball coming off way hotter. So just by naturally, they're going to kind of have more pace to it. But I think it's all relative to the individual. Again, there's been great putters that have dived everything in, and there's been great putters who've rammed everything in. It just kind of goes back to you just got to figure out what suits your personality, what suits your stroke, and what you've made putts with more than anything.
Would you say Tiger was both of those?
Tiger was definitely more of a hammering them in.
Depending on the situation there, right?
Yeah, well, like you see a lot of the putts he made from like 20 feet, though, they hit the back of that cup.
It's true. It's true. All right, folks. I think we could stand here and ask Marcus questions all day long and never run out of things to talk about. But we want to continue on with our day. So thank you so very much. That was super informative.